Final Fantasy 15 released in 2016 to mixed reception. Final Fantasy fans found it to be too big and a departure from what they liked about the series. Newcomers found it lacking, and it was generally maligned as an unfinished product that was clearly rushed out the door after being in development hell for over 10 years. Of course, that isn't where the story ends for Final Fantasy 15. Over the course of a couple years, the game would receive a large amount of updates that would go a long way in fleshing out the game, to the point where the Royal Edition feels like a completely new experience from the initial release. Royal Edition goes a long way in making Final Fantasy 15 a complete experience. When I played Final Fantasy 15 for the first time, I admit the way I played it didn't help my opinion. I rushed through the main story almost impatiently, not taking the time to stop and take in the sights and sounds the way the game clearly wanted me to. It didn't help that I was a college freshman at the time, so I was generally impatient, but I've always struggled with being an impatient gamer. However, returning to it with the Royal Edition made me realize that I genuinely did like this game, and I had missed out on some great stuff because of my tunnel vision. Final Fantasy XV follows Prince Noctis and his retainers Prompto, Gladio, and Ignis as they travel the world. While there are some more involved plot elements and lore bits that come into play, especially at the beginning of the game, this is very much all you really need to know. This is a road trip, complete with long stretches spent in a car listening to music, campfire shenanigans, and photo taking. Now, you're playing as a group of magic wielders who can grab their swords out of thin air and chuck them at their enemies, but it's still a road trip. The banter between Noctis and the gang is amazingly well put together, and the game goes a long way in making this brotherhood between the four feel believable and earned.
Sometimes I wonder if we'll ever sit inside that beautiful car again.
Sitting most of the day was pretty nice.
Napping was even better.
Not only do these four have history, the game's campaign develops their relationship so thoroughly that my favorite cutscene is a flashback to a campfire conversation, not one of the big cinematic moments throughout the game. Unfortunately, for as much as Royal Edition did to improve the main campaign, most of the other characters come across as a bit thin. Luna Freya, Noctis' supposed love interest, has a pitiful amount of screen time given the amount of weight she holds in the narrative, and the player has no chance to really connect with her. Noctis seems to have a history with her, but we only get small glimpses into it. It doesn't help. A lot of this game has story elements in other forms of media, from an anime to a CG movie to even mobile projects. While I don't outright condemn this approach, the fact that so many pieces of vital information and context are locked behind these mediums is a bit outrageous and doesn't help an already disconnected feeling narrative. Final Fantasy XV is an open world game with all of the good and bad connotations that comes with. Big expansive areas, lots of side content, fast travel, you name it, this game has it. Nothing about 15's open world systems are at all unique or interesting. The traversal is serviceable at best, and driving in the car mostly ends with me using the auto travel to spend time looking at my phone. Walking around is a bit slow given how large the map is, and while chocobo riding is fun, it feels more like a band-aid than a solution. The side quests in general are perhaps the most glaring example of this. Most of them are simply fetch quests with next to no bearing on the main quest, and simply act as easy ways of getting experience. While there are some genuinely amazing side quests, especially the ones that involve another character joining your party, the side content itself feels ripped out of any other open world game. All of that said, there's something about it that I enjoy. Something about the rhythm this game sets with its side content is something that feels cozy. I'm certain that the way the experience system functions is a big part of this. Being able to save up your experience and then cash it all in one moment is truly satisfying, and the amount of levels you can get by doing this can get pretty high up. It helps that the banter truly never stops between the party members, and I would say the jokes land more often than they miss. This party really does carry a lot of this game's experience. Combat is a bit of a mixed bag. Magic is relegated to a weird consumable system. The weapon types feel more like a visual change than a mechanical one. And outside of the team attack mechanic, the other party members don't feel as though they add a whole lot. However, there are some positives. The warp strike mechanic is fun to use, especially when you hit one from a long distance for massive damage. The blindside mechanic is fun too, and getting to see several different animations where the party works together can be fun. The armature mechanic, while feeling like a bit of a win button, does make for a satisfying way of dishing out more and more damage, and the added chain attack is welcome as a way to make finishing a fight all the more cinematic. While many of the bosses in this game come down to being a simple damage sponge, plenty of them have their own mechanics that make them interesting. From the gigantic turtle and especially the human fights, this game does a good job making the story bosses impressive from a gameplay perspective, even though from a story perspective, many are lacking proper context. The game is largely broken up into two sections, the open world and the linear narrative section. While the linear narrative has some explorable elements, most of the exploration is in the open world. Where the linear section is at its strongest is in the big bombastic set pieces, though the open world isn't without these. I find the final area of the game to be a good mix of the two, acting as a smaller explorable zone than just a small dungeon you run through. My favorite element of this game is the dungeon crawling. While the dungeons themselves are fairly linear, they all have their own identities, and their rewards tend to be super worth it. It's another element of this game that works despite its flaws, due to the party being so cohesive and well thought out. Overall, Final Fantasy XV isn't exactly my favorite game of all time, but it's certainly a game I recognize as a comfortable experience. Nothing about it is outright offensive, and even the stuff I don't generally like about the game isn't a deal breaker. While I understand why Final Fantasy fans aren't exactly massive fans of this game in particular, I, for one, always look forward to spending time with Noctis and the boys.
So, you thinking to fairy tale Lady Lunafreya back to the Crown City?
Nah, no need to rush to happily ever after.
Wow. Still can't believe you're actually tying the knot, dude. How does it feel now that it's finally happening?
Fine, I guess.
It came from there.